Hello, welcome to the Harry Potter Paint at Home Kit. Let's make sure you're all set up so that we can start painting. Inside of your kit, you'll find a placemat, so let's make sure we put that down on the table before we get started. You'll also find that we've got a blue towel that we'll use to dry off our paintbrushes as we rinse. We've got a set of brushes. We've got a large square, a medium square, and a round brush. We've also got a set of paints that we're going to use. I've set mine out on a tray so that you can see the colors that we're going to use today. And I've left that tan color paint right inside that container today. And then if you'd like, go ahead and fill up your cup half filled with water so that we can rinse our brushes today. And inside your kit, I've included something special. I've created a custom decal out of vinyl stickers that we can add to our painting at the very end. So I'm going to take this and set it aside, and we are going to get ready to paint. So if you need a few seconds to finish setting up your area, go ahead and pause the video. And if you're ready to get going, let's go ahead and jump right on in, and we're going to start painting Harry Potter. All right, to get started, I'm going to start with this little round brush. And I'm going to start right into the white paint. And the areas that we're going to paint first are going to be the shirt on Harry Potter. So I'm going to take a little bit of white paint on the end of my round brush, and I'm going to be painting in this triangle area on Harry Potter's shirt. So on either side, this is where his little shirt collar comes down on the minifig. So I'm going to be painting this in white. So I know the canvas is white already, but when we're finished, we don't want to leave that raw canvas white, else it'll look a little weird when we're done. So we're going to go ahead and paint that in white right now. So that little triangle area. I'm going to jump over and do the one right on the other side of that. Just using this cute little round brush. And a thin coat of white paint. We don't want our paint to be too chunky on the canvas. Nice job. Then right next to the collar on Harry Potter, there's going to be two different areas. We've got these two little diamond shapes that are right next to these triangles. This is also the inside of his shirt that's also going to be painted white. So using the same little round brush, I'm going to come right inside and paint those areas white as well. So just smoothing out the paint. And it's all right if I go over the lines, because we're going to come at the very end of the painting and add a little bit of definition to those and redefine those lines. Great job. So let's check and make sure that we have smoothed out all our paint so it dries really nice. And that's all the white we're going to put down for right now. So I'm going to take my brush into my water. I'm going to push the brush all the way down to the bottom of the glass. Give it a little bit of a scrub at the bottom. I'm going to take my blue towel over to my water. Set my brush right down in my towel. Give my brush a little squeeze, and I'll have a nice clean brush to use. Great job. All right, next we're going to work on the skin for Harry Potter. So we've got the background of his face, and then we also have his hand, which is holding his wand. So I'm going to switch brush sizes, and I'm going to move to the smaller of the two square brushes. And I'm going to take the lid off of this tan colored paint. So I decided to leave the paint right in the container, making it just a little bit easier for me to use this paint color today. Now, I'm going to go right over all of the pencil mark that I have on Harry Potter. and I'm going to apply a thin coat of this tan paint. So I'm going to tilt my canvas just a little bit, and I'm going to apply a thin coat of this tan paint. And as you start to paint, you'll be able to see that you can see those pencil marks right through the paint. This is a very thin paint. It's not very thick at all. And so I mixed it that way on purpose so that we don't lose our pencil marks. I'm also using long brush strokes from top to bottom, and I'm smoothing out any lumps of paint that I might have because I just want a nice thin coat of paint on the back of his face. If I go over any lines, I'm not too concerned about that because any other areas that I paint are going to be covered with a dark paint, and it's going to cover over any of the tan that I might get outside of the lines. So again, just a nice thin coat of paint right over the back of his face. I'm going right over those pencil lines, but I'm smoothing out all the lumps of paint. I don't want thick paint on his face. Nice long lines. And again, if you go outside the lines like I did into his hair a little bit, I'm not really worried about that because the black is going to cover that up. I'm going to move over to his hand, and I'm going to paint the outside of his Lego hand, the part that's holding on to the wand. Just a nice thin coat of paint. And then as you can see, we'll still be able to see that pencil mark, which is great because we're going to add some shading towards the very end of our painting, and we're definitely going to want to see that pencil mark. So again, smooth out any paint that might be really lumpy on your canvas. So we are done with the face and the hands. I'm going to take my brush over to the water and I'm going to rinse it off. I'm going to look for any spots that I might have missed really quick on his face. Make sure that there's nothing else that I want to touch up, and I'm going to rinse that brush off. And I'm just going to set the lid right back onto the tan color and set that aside for a little bit. So I'm going to rinse this brush off, and then I'm going to get ready for my next color. So as we're working together with the video, remember, if I'm going too fast, you can pause the video. You can always rewind it and look at a step that we did together. Or if I'm going too slow, which sometimes I do paint a little bit slow, you can always speed it up and go faster. So that's what is so great about having these paint at home videos. All right, so let's move on to one of my favorite colors, which is this gorgeous metallic gold. Now I wish it was a real pile of gold on my paint palette. I think it is one of the most magnificent colors. It is a very thick color. The metallic colors tend to be a little bit thick. So if you're having a hard time painting with this color, you can take your brush and tap just the very tip of the bristles into the water, bring it back over to the paint and thin your paint out a little bit, and it makes it just a little bit easier to paint with. So with the gold paint, we're going to be painting in the entire wand. We're also going to be painting in part of the tie and part of his outfit, along with part of the crest that's right on the front of the minifig. So I'm going to start with the wand, and I'm going to go back to that clean square brush that we just cleaned. I'm going to grab some of the gold paint on both sides of the brush, and I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to go right over any of the lines that I've put inside of the wand. So the first coat of this metallic gold is going to be transparent. It's a little bit of a thin paint when we first start, and that second coat of paint will really start to make it super shiny. But as you start to paint with this, you'll see how it feels really thick, where it's kind of a little bit more hard to press the paint into the canvas. It feels a little bit chunkier. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry while I work on some of the other parts of my painting, and then I'm going to come back and add a second coat to that, and it's really going to start shining off the page. I'm going to rinse off this brush just to keep it nice and clean, and then I'm going to switch to that little tiny round brush. Alright, so now I've switched to this little tiny round brush. I'm going to go into my gold paint. And the areas that we're going to paint on the minifig's shirt will be this part of the crest right here to the right. So the house for Harry Potter is Gryffindor, and Gryffindor's colors are this gorgeous crimson and this kind of yellowish gold color. So I went with straight gold. I want to give him some pizzazz when he hangs on your wall. So we've got a crimson color and a gold color. So on this right side, we're going to be painting gold. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this first layer of gold. And as we're doing this, we want to take that color all the way straight down to the very bottom of the canvas as well. So when it hangs on your wall, that gold wraps all the way down to the bottom. So just a nice quick coat of color, and then we'll come back as this starts to dry and add a second coat to it. Beautiful. All right, let's go back to Harry Potter's tie. This stripe that comes straight down and across, this is going to be crimson. So all of these little pockets that are around it, these little triangle shapes right above and below it, and I'm going to put a little dot right there so you can see. Above and below it are going to be gold, and on either side are also going to be gold. So we have 4 little pockets of color that kind of go around. I call it kind of like this little racing stripe on his tie, where he's tied his knot. These little pockets right around it are going to be gold as part of the Gryffindor colors. So we painted the white from his nice crisp uniform shirt, and now we're coming in and adding the colors to his tie. So be really careful that you don't set your hand in your crest. So you don't want to accidentally drag gold paint across your painting. Very good. So this is really going to come together when we start to add the red in there. All right, so let's talk about Harry Potter's stripes that he has. This first tiny V is going to be gray because that's part of his top. And then the stripe colors, we have 1, 2, and 3. So this very middle stripe is going to be gold. So the one right in the middle. So I'm going to come in here and paint this with a gold stripe. And it's all right if you go outside of the lines a little bit, because anything that's outside of the lines is going to be covered up with that crimson color. So I'm going to apply a quick line in the gold. And then we're going to let that start to dry. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to start with the wand, and then I'm going to go back to the crest, back to the tie, and then back to the stripe, and I'm just going to add a quick coat in gold and add a second layer to what I've just done to help really brighten it up and make it less transparent on the canvas. So I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to go back to the square brush that I was using, and I'm just going to repeat what I did. And then right away, just adding a quick layer to the paint really starts to help everything in the background disappear. So if you hear strange noises in my house today while I'm painting, I do have a gorgeous black cat, and normally she hangs out in a different room when I do my paint videos. But today, being Harry Potter, I didn't realize that she has escaped, which makes me think perhaps she might not be a cat at all, and perhaps she is a curious wizard that has escaped my room and is curious to see what is going on, because usually she is camera shy and runs away from everything that I do. But she has me out at least 10 times, which you might catch on the video if you listen to it back. So very strange behavior coming from my cat today. She's usually very, very quiet and never makes a sound. But she's being very mischievous today. right? So you can really see adding the second coat, it goes on so quickly and it really adds all that beautiful color. And I chose gold because I wanted to go with a very rich color for Harry Potter. He's such an amazing character in the series. There are actually so many amazing characters in the series. We could paint Harry Potter characters, I think, for a straight year and never get to them all, along with all the amazing creatures. And oh gosh, where to start? But I wanted to start with a classic Harry Potter character and just do something really rich looking for him, because he is such an amazing character. And I really love the way that this gold pops out. Great, so when you're finished, you can rinse your brush. And if you're not quite done, you can pause the video and then restart it when you're ready to go on to the next step. Now we're ready to do Harry Potter's minifig shirt. So we're going to be working with light gray, and we're going to be working on the very front of his shirt, along with, I'm going to grab this small brush so you can see, along with this little tiny V that sits right underneath the tie, and then part of his sleeve, which is this very first little half C that's right above his hand. So I'm going to start with the small round brush, and I'm going to go straight into the light gray color. And I'm going to be painting this first section, this small V shape, right underneath the section of the tie that we did. Next, I'm going to move on to this little C shape right above his hand, because I'm going to stick with this small, tiny round brush. And this will help me get into these little areas right by his hand. Finally, I'm going to move on to his shirt. So I'm going to stick with this small brush just to get up in this little top area, that little tiny corner right there. And then I'm going to use it to help me in this top shoulder area. It's a little bit of a small area to work in. I am going to switch to a larger brush, but this will help me with just a little bit of detail right there. All right, I'm going to rinse this out and switch to a square brush. As you're painting with the light gray, if it's a little bit light and you can see a little bit of the color from the background coming through, let it dry and then you can come back and add a second layer of paint to it. So I'm going to take this color and I'm going to bring it all the way down to the bottom of the canvas. So when it hangs on the wall, I've got the color that wraps all the way down to the bottom. And while I have my canvas up, I'm going to do right next to that little crest. I'm going to lift my canvas up one more time and I'm going to do right beside the gold part of the crest on the shirt, right next to where his arm is going to come down. This color is going to dry quite quickly because it is a very nice fluid color, nice and thin. I'm going to take this same brush that I've been using and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix a special color for his arms, for the side of his Lego body, and then for his sleeve right here. So we're going to mix our light gray with a little bit of black and we're going to make a custom color. We're going to be mixing a little bit of dark gray together. So I'm going to pull some light gray towards the black with my brush. And then coming up here towards the black, I'm going to scoop up just a tiny bit of black on my brush and I'm going to tap it into the light gray and I'm going to mix those two colors together. And I'm going to keep pressing that brush in and mixing it and making a little bit darker. Perfect. I'm going to use that dark gray on my brush And I'm going to start working on the shoulders and the side of my minifig, along with the rest of his Lego arm. So for the parts of this minifig, if you'd like, you can definitely switch brushes as you need to. If you have too much paint on your brush, you can definitely rinse it off and start with a clean brush as well. And then remember to take this color and wrap it all the way down off the bottom of your canvas. I'm going to go ahead and switch brushes. I'm getting into some of the smaller areas. So I'm definitely going to switch to a smaller brush. And I'm going to rinse this one out as good as I can to get all of that gray off the brush. There are so many great houses to the Harry Potter series. Gryffindor is incredible. The Slytherin house is incredible. Hufflepuff, I don't think I've ever met a Hufflepuff that I don't like. They are super caring. And then of course Ravenclaw. So I don't know which house you love. When we took the kids, I've got 2 kids. That I love my kids. I think they're awesome. When we took them to Universal Studios, we were able to visit the part of the park that is completely dedicated to Harry Potter and visit Diagon's Alley. Oh, it was amazing. Have some butterbeer, which was incredible. So good. Oh, so we got the kids and we saved up some money, and the kids really earned it, and they were able to go and get fitted with their Harry Potter wands one year, and then the following year they were able to get their capes. And so I was really curious to see what house they would choose, and they both ended up choosing Gryffindor, which was really cool. So it was just a really fun experience. Also, while you're painting, guys, don't forget that you can turn your canvas at different angles to help you paint. I'm going to turn my canvas to help me get this little spot right here by this cute little Lego hand. But gosh, it was a lot of fun. Just the whole experience of being kind of immersed in that Harry Potter world. And of course the rides were amazing too. But I've always wondered how cool it would be if you could really go to a train station and bust through a wall, and the next thing you know, be at Hogwarts and be at this amazing wizardry school and be a part of that Harry Potter world. It would just be so exciting. And then I wonder what house I would be a part of. So right here under the cape, we've got this continuation of the top of the minifig body. So this little part right here, we're going to continue it with just a little bit of that dark gray. So this little pocket right here is dark gray. So there's just a couple parts on this minifig that are a little tricky to kind of get in there and paint. So use that tiny round brush and just a really light touch to get in there. Don't press too hard with your paintbrush. There we go. All right, I'm going to come over and finish up that dark gray and finish up his sleeve. So I'm going to turn my painting again to help me get into some of these little tiny spaces. Fantastic. The same thing with the dark gray as the light gray. If there's a couple spots that are a little bit transparent, you can come back and touch those up with the second coat of the gray that you mixed. For the most part, because this is such a nice dark gray color, that's going to cover really, really nice the first time. So there shouldn't be too many touch-ups. All right, fantastic. We're gonna move on. I'm gonna rinse that brush out, get it nice and clean. And we're gonna move on to that gorgeous crimson Gryffindor color. I'm gonna start up with the tie. So right here, where that cool little racing stripe is, right here, we're gonna start with crimson. So remember these diamond shapes that we first painted? That's part of the crisp white shirt. So we want to stay away from that. So I'm going to grab this crimson color and I'm going to paint this cool little stripe right here for Harry Potter's tie. The crimson's going to feel a little bit the same way that the gold did, where it's going to feel a little bit transparent, but we can always come back and add a second coat of paint to this. And if the paint feels a little bit sticky, just tap the very tip of the bristles into your water and then back into the paint, and it'll paint a little bit smoother for you. It's a bit of a thick paint as well, just like the gold was. Oh, that looks neat. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the stripes. So I'm going to put the tip of my brush in just a little bit of water, and I'm going to grab a little bit of paint, and I'm going to start to work on the stripes. So I like to start with a little bit of water and just thinning out my paint and just making a nice thin coat in paint first, and then I'll come back and add a second coat of paint. It helps the paint to go on a little bit easier. There we go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come right by the crust. So on this part we have gold. On the part right next to it, we're going to paint that in the crimson. And we're going to finish off the crust. I'm going to pick up the painting and continue that gorgeous color all the way down to the bottom. And the same way that we did with the gold, I'm going to start back with this little racing stripe part of the tie, and then working in the same pattern that I did before, the tie, my stripes, and then the crest. I'm going to add a second layer of the crimson, and then it's going to darken that up for me. And then I'll be done with the colors of the Gryffindor house. If your painting isn't quite ready for a second coat and it still needs to dry a little bit, then that's just fine. You can leave it to dry and then come back at the end of the painting and do any finishing touch-ups, which would be maybe a second coat in any color that you need. So if you need more gray in a different area, if you need more red, you can do that at the end of the painting when everything has dried. Just remember to rinse your brush out really good between colors and to make sure that it's dried out when you move from color to color. Right, I'm going to rinse this brush out and then we're going to move on to the next step. I'm going to take the smaller of the square brushes and I'm going to move on to Harry Potter's cloak and hair. I'm going to be using the black paint and painting in this background area. So the cloak of Harry Potter is going to come right down in front of the body of the minifig and right over his shoulder and right off the canvas. So as I'm painting, I want to make sure that I continue his cloak all the way off onto the side of the canvas as well. I just knocked Harry Potter over. Here you go, bud. So being very careful around his face, I'm going to follow those lines that were drawn for his face and then come up and around his back and shoulder. And then follow the side line right off the edge of the canvas. So that way his cape wraps all the way around. And being very careful, I'm going to come right underneath his neck. And continue to paint in the space underneath this cloak. And the black is a really nice, thin flowing paint. It's really easy to paint with. It spreads out really, really nice. I'm going to turn my canvas to the side so I can get to this area a little bit easier. I'm going to come up on the side of his neck. And any areas that I feel are too small for the large square brush, I'm going to use the smaller round brush to get to. So I'm going to leave this area for just a minute and come back to it. To finish this cape, I'm switching to a smaller brush. So I can get in those smaller areas just a little bit easier. Great job. Next, I'm going to work on the hair for Harry Potter using the square brush. He looks so much better once we start putting some hair on him. And he will definitely look better once we start putting eyes on him. He'll be like, thank you, I can see. Make sure you're using the brush size that works for you. I'm using that smaller of the square brushes. It gives me a little bit more control. I'm not worried about having too big of a brush and accidentally getting paint somewhere that I don't want it. If you get in these little tiny areas that are on the side of his head where his ears would be, and you need to use a smaller brush, then by all means, please switch to that smaller brush. So it's a little bit easier for you if you need it. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that all of the paint on the canvas has a chance to dry before we do any of the detail on Harry Potter's face. So we've got about 3 steps left. We've got his face, we're going to paint the background, and then we're going to paint all of our highlighted details. So let's make sure our painting has had a really good chance to set up and dry before we go on and do our finishing touches on this painting. So I'm going to take a few seconds, I'm going to clean my brushes out really good, and then we're going to get started for the last part of our painting together. So I'll see you back in just a few minutes. Now that everything's set up and dried, we're going to go ahead and work on Harry Potter's face. So I'm going to use the little tiny round brush. We're going to use black paint, and then I'm going to use my water. In order to get into all of these little spaces, I'm going to take the tip of my brush and just break the surface of the water. I'm going to pull a little bit of black paint into my tray, and then I'm going to create a little bit of a thin paint, almost so it's like a little bit of a watercolor, a nice thin ink. I'm going to turn my painting to the side so that I can work a little bit easier. So I'm going to work from the side. I'm going to do my eye, my eyebrow, my glasses, and my mouth. And then I'm going to turn my painting in the opposite direction so I can get the other side, which is a little bit easier for me to work. And then I'm always using my brush and working towards me in this direction instead of trying to push my brush away from me, especially when I do small details, so that way my bristles don't accidentally brush out and fan out, and then I get a lot of black paint everywhere. So I'm going to use the paint like a very thin ink or like a very thin watercolor at first before I just grab a gob of black paint. And I'm going to start with the mouth, and then very lightly, almost as if my brush is a pencil, I'm going to use tiny brush strokes, and then I'm going to paint in the mouth. So just very light with hardly any paint on my brush. I'm going to think about my brush being almost like a pencil, almost like I'm just kind of coloring in or tracing in these little tiny lines. And my paint almost feels like a watercolor because I added some water to it. So it's very thin. There you go. So now he has a nice smile. I'm going to grab some more paint, and then I'm going to start with this eye. I'm going to paint the entire eye black. Just a very thin coat of black paint at first. Just a cute little round circle. What I'm going to do is eyebrow. And then I'm going to do his glasses. I'm going to turn him on the opposite side, and now I'm going to work on his other eye and his other eyebrow. What do you think, Harry Potter? How's he looking? Got my Harry Potter minifig hanging out in the corner of our video, and he's got a smile on his face, so I think he's pretty pleased with everything. And there we go. You have a very nice face, Mr. Harry Potter. Now, if I want to darken the areas that I've done in a little bit darker, now I'm going to grab just a tiny bit of black paint, straight black paint on the end of my brush. And then I can come in and I can darken the areas that I've done. But I just want to be really careful now because this paint is much thicker than that thin paint that I made. So it's going to be much chunkier, a little bit harder to spread on the canvas. So I'm just going to make his eyes darker, but I'm going to leave his mouth with that thin coat of paint that I made, and I'm also going to leave the rim of glasses. I'm going to let those be a little bit more gray. If you look on this series minifig, the glasses that they put on Harry Potter, they were actually a little bit of a light gray color, the frames on the glasses, and his eyes were a nice dark black color. I'm going to darken in the middle of his eyebrows a little bit because his eyebrows were black. So I'm going to darken in just his eyebrows a tiny bit and his eyes, but I'm not going to play around too much with the mouth because I don't want to accidentally get a whole bunch of thick dark paint on there. Alright, you look great. I'm going to rinse out my brush and then I'm going to go ahead and let his face dry. We'll add some white spots in his eyes at the very end of the painting, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the outside area with the purple. So I'm going to grab that large square brush that's kind of been hanging out, not really doing anything this whole painting, and we're going to start in this gorgeous purple color. This is a nice thin paint. I'm going to start on the sides of my canvas, and I'm just going to flip my brush back and forth, kind of like a pancake. In little tiny short bursts of the brush, it's going to leave little brush marks on the canvas, and I want this really textured background behind Harry Potter because right now everything's nice and smooth. So in the background I'm going to create a little bit of chaos because there's always adventure going on in the Harry Potter novels. So I'm going to create kind of this mysterious background, and I think the purple just complements the mystery that surrounds Harry Potter. So being really careful, I'm just going to use the corner of that brush to get around his hair and by his Lego face and by his shoulder. And again, if this brush is a little bit too big, of course you can always switch to a smaller brush to get into some of those smaller areas. When I get to the sides of the canvas, I'm going to just pick that up very carefully and then make sure I get the sides of the canvas as well. So let's go ahead and paint the background in this really cool transparent purple color. And I'm only going to put one coat of purple because I really want to see the white coming through from the canvas in the background. I want it to help give me that shading and that texture. As I move closer to Harry Potter's head on this left side of the picture, I'm going to switch to the smaller square brush to help me get into these little detailed parts. That big brush is just going to be a little bit too clumsy for me. Gosh, I just love how that looks with the purple in the background. It really makes it come to life. All right, I'm going to rinse out these two brushes, and then I'm going to use this round brush for the rest of the painting for all of the highlights. Ooh, I'm getting carried away. My water's splashing out of my cup. All right, so let's start our highlights. I'm going to start with some of the tan that we used at the beginning of the picture, and I'm going to use some of the gold, and we're going to custom mix a little bit of a color. I'm going to grab with my round brush just a small bit of tan, and I'm going to set it on my tray. So I'm going to roll a little bit of color right onto my tray. Then I'm going to take some gold and I'm going to blend in a little bit of gold. About half tan, half gold. And we're going to use this for some of the highlights that are on Harry Potter's face and his hands, and for his lightning bolt that he has on his forehead. Right, I'm going to rinse off the extra paint that's on my paintbrush, and I'm going to start with a nice clean brush. Nice clean brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of paint just on the very tip of my brush, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint the lightning bolt on Harry Potter's forehead. So we know that he has this lightning bolt on his forehead, but I didn't want to go too dark with this color. I want to give the hint that it's there without making it stand out too much. So if you have a darker color at home that you want to paint this, by all means you can definitely change that color. So this is going to give that illusion that that lightning bolt is there. I'm going to take the same brush with the same amount of paint that I have on it, and I'm going to go over to where his hands are. Down here at this bottom section of his hand, and on the very inside, I'm going to take this brush with the paint that I have, and I'm going to scrub it back and forth on this bottom section. So I'm just kind of taking that brush and scrubbing it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So instead of coming in and painting it completely over what I've done, I'm just scrubbing the extra paint right on top. So I can still see some of the tan behind it, but I've given it a little bit of extra color on top. I'm going to grab just a tiny bit of paint on the very tip of my brush. I'm going to do the exact same thing right on the inside part of the Lego hand on the other side. So we're just adding a little bit of shadow. But if you feel like you want to paint the entire inside of this little part right here with that new color that you've created, with that little bit darker tan that we've created, you can do that. And then we picked up just a little bit of that iridescent gold, a little bit of that glowing color from his uniform and from the wand in the paint mix that we've had, that we mixed together. I'm going to take the remaining paint that I have on my brush. I just want a really nice dry brush. And I'm going to go right above the cloak that Harry Potter has. And I'm going to kind of give him a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow right underneath his cheeks on either side and down into his neck. We just want to give the illusion that his head is connected to his Lego body. Right now everything feels a little bit flat, so we just want to make sure we have a little bit of color on our brush. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to follow that line right under his neck. I'm just scrubbing back and forth. If I run out of paint, I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of that tan color that I mixed, and I'm just following it right underneath where his head is, right on this bottom part, kind of that jawline. And then down into his neck, and I'm just kind of scrubbing that brush back and forth. So my brush is very dry with paint. And then now Harry Potter went from looking like he had kind of this weird head to all of a sudden looking like he has a jaw with a chin and a neck. Okay, and don't worry, if some of your extra color went outside on your cloak, that is so easy to fix. I'm going to pick up that little square brush that I had. I'm going to grab a tiny bit of black paint. And then I'm just going to clean that up really quick with a thin layer of black paint. Super thin layer of black paint, and it'll get rid of any of that paint that might have leaked out onto the black cloak. Gorgeous. All right, so we've got all of those highlights in. We have the ones down by the hand, the jawline and the neck, and then that really cool lightning bolt. So we're done with this light kind of highlighted tan color that we mixed. So we're going to rinse our brushes out, and then we're going to get ready for our white highlights. Gorgeous. So my brush is nice and clean. So let's go in and add a few white highlights to start making this three-dimensional. I'm going to start with the shoulders of Harry Potter's cloak, kind of this back portion. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to put it into the white paint. I'm going to roll my brush onto my plate so I get this nice pointed tip. And I'm going to roll most of the paint off of my brush. So I've got hardly any paint on my brush. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to hold it like a pencil, and I'm going to take one line right down the back shoulder. So my brush hardly has any paint on it, and I've got one nice long white line. I'm going to grab a little bit more paint. I'm going to roll my brush into my plate. I'm going to do the same thing right here on the back shoulder between his wand and his head, and then right along this back side right here. Just giving him a little bit of highlight on the back of his cape. So taking a look at it, if you'd like those lines to be a little bit darker, you can come back and add a second layer of white over it, but I like to go a little bit lighter the first time and then see if I'd like to brighten up those lines a little bit. Great job. Okay, the next line we're gonna do is gonna follow the curve of the cloak. And this is gonna really define the very front of the cloak and help it to look three-dimensional. I'm gonna dip the very tip of my brush in a little bit of water. I'm gonna grab a little bit of white paint. So depending where you are and how the weather is, it's a little bit warm where I'm painting today, so my paint is feeling a little bit sticky. So I'm taking my brush and just a little bit of water to help thin out that paint. So when I make that long line, I make sure it's gonna go all the way across on the first time. So holding my brush like a pencil, with a little bit of paint on my brush, I'm gonna follow that curved line of my cloak that goes right in front of my shirt. So let's go ahead and do that together. Then if you'd like it to be a little bit darker, you can go over that line. Great job. Now with the remaining white that I have on my brush, I'm going to come up to this area in Harry Potter's head, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight some of his hair, because right now he's got a lot of hair up there and I want to make a bit of a reflection. So I'm going to hold my brush to the side and I'm going to scrub, and because his hair has a little bit of a round shape, I'm going to make this highlight a little bit round. So I'm going to start small and then gradually scratch it so it gets bigger and comes down the side. And I'm going to do this until all of the paint disappears off of my paintbrush. And then if I'd like to make this darker, I can come back and add a little bit more white, and then I can make this highlight a little bit more brighter with a little bit more white paint if I'd like. So again, I'm just kind of scrubbing back and forth, up and down with my brush. And I can begin to make that brighter by adding more white paint. So this highlight on his hair, you can have a really good time with just playing around with it, adding more white to it or less white. And then I'll start thick, bring it around until it just kind of disappears into the light. So I'm going to rinse the white out of my brush, and then our last marks that we're going to do are going to be to add some of our low lights and our black outlines. I'm going to take my brush into the black paint, and we're going to start to define some of our lines for a minifig shirt. And this is one of my favorite last touches that we do, because this is where these last lines really defines this piece. And once we put these last lines in, it's like, oh my goodness, he looks amazing. I'm going to run my brush with the black paint right down where his Lego arm meets his minifig shirt. So just one nice long black line from top to bottom. And I'll kind of start up in my cloak, run that line down, and then right underneath the canvas. Okay. Right there. And then all that black will dry that's up in that cloak. All right, moving over just a little bit, I'm going to grab a tiny bit of black paint, and I'm going to roll the tip of my brush in my plate to help give me a nice tiny tip on my brush. And I'm going to outline this triangle shape for my collar, just this little tiny V that I have right here. So I'm going to come down and then right up along that crimson color. And I'm going to move over to the next V shape that we did, that very first triangle that we painted. And I'm going to highlight that black as well. Well, I shouldn't say highlight, I should say outline. So it's almost like our second check mark. And already the collar of his uniform is starting to pop out. Harry Potter, you look stunning. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to go right across the very top of his shirt, and I'm actually going to go right through this cloak right here, but I'm going to be really careful not to hit that white line. So I'm just going to grab a tiny bit of water to help me thin out my paints. As I said, it's a little bit warm where I'm painting, so my paints are getting a little bit tacky. So I'm going to go straight across from this light gray corner all the way straight across. And we're almost there, guys. Gorgeous. Now from this corner where we stopped, we're going to draw a line from this corner to this corner. So if we were to take our brush, there would be an angled line. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to paint in an angled line. And I'm not worried about that black that I put in the cloak, because that is going to disappear when it dries. And the final black line for our painting is going to be from our corner all the way down. So I'm going to turn my painting just a little bit to help me make a straight line. So that way I can come just straight down instead of trying to go kind of sideways with my arm. And then I'm going to take this right off the bottom of the canvas. and down. In your kits, I've included a vinyl logo for you. So if you'd like to put it on your canvas, I'll show you how to do that now. But you can also use that for anything that you'd like. So when I attach this to the canvas, in order to keep the lettering accurate as far as height, because if you notice on the logo, the H is a little bit higher than the P. What I generally tend to do is I'll peel back the top of the stickers, and then I'll begin to just peel away the lettering partway from the backing of the sticker. And I'll roll it back just a little bit. So it takes just a little bit of patience, and if there's an extra pair of hands around, that always helps as well. So I'll take it where the first part of the sticker comes off the backing just a little bit, and then that'll keep the height on my lettering pretty accurate to the logo of the Harry Potter brand. And then I can take this and set those letters right onto my canvas, and then I'm certain that my spacing will remain accurate. I'll press those down with my finger, and then I'll very carefully start to unpeel the paper, and as I'm unpeeling the paper, I'll just continue to press my finger down. Now the H is a little bit tricky because it has some little tiny curls in it and little furls in it, so you just want to make sure you straighten those out. And then those will come right off the paper for you, and you can straighten those out. And I promise you, you do not need any wizarding magic for your Harry Potter logo, just a little bit of patience. If these start to peel off a little bit, you can put a little bit of glue behind the backing of these, and then those will stay right on your canvas. Now that the logo is on your painting, we're going to add the dots for the white eyes, and then you can let this sit and dry for a while, and then he'll be all ready to hang. I'm going to use the back of that large square brush. I'm going to dip it into the white paint, and using the back of the square brush, I'm going to put 2 dots right in the center of Harry Potter's eyes. So this paint will be a little bit thicker, so it'll need a little bit more time to dry. And be careful when you rinse your brush that you don't get that white paint all over your hands. So we'll let him sit and dry. Those eyes will dry nice. They'll just take probably about 15 minutes to dry. Thank you for painting today. I hope you enjoy your Harry Potter painting, and we'll see you again.